Hello, Marvel. Sorry.
Do you want to tilt your thing?
Multitasking.
You have a lot of headroom. There we go.
Okay,
Maybe a little bit more. Well, I guess you're even with Alison, so it's good. Yeah, no, that looks good.
Right.
Here's a story. We got the Brady Bunch thing going on for us here.
Mm-hmm.
So, hey gang, we were the crew that went out to Utah, and then Alison came back to Colorado with me, and I was actually looking through the videos that we did. I don't know if Drew and Lynn, if you guys watched some of the other videos we did away from, you guys came to the Transhumanist conference with us, but we did a lot of other videos out there too. So I kind of wanted to kind of get everyone's kind of initial kind of overview of kind of what they took away from that. Drew, you were saying that it was kind of a fire hose. It was, a lot of information, and for me too. And I was just talking to Alison about this. It's like people need to have things distilled down to them in like a simple thing. That's why the World Economic Forum and the Klaus Schwab thing is so attractive to people, because they're like, oh, okay, here's a thing that I can focus on. But if you look at this whole thing, there's like pieces of it all over the place, and it's really hard to like put all that together. Like, what does all this have to do? How is this all connected? Is it all connected? So Drew, you were just saying before
I was
started.
just saying that attending the conference was quite a bit of a fire hose for me because of the technology piece. And I'm still new to a lot of this. I have intuitive sense about things, and I could say that many years ago, I put 2 and 2 together as like where this is going. And I used the words of C.S. Lewis that this is moving towards the abolition of man. And I could see even just teeny pieces of it. And I didn't have to have all of the little pieces in the middle filled in. I just knew where that was going. Since meeting Alison and having her break down what's happening in the world today, kind of in real time, sort of, my eyes have opened more, but still it's hard to take everything in. That's why I compare it to like this fire hose, and why I personally will watch Alison's videos over like 25 times, or have it playing in the background, because I think, at some point, one of these pieces is going to connect, and not necessarily for myself, but so I'll be able to explain it to someone else. Because now that my eyes have been kind of primed to this, I'm looking at my own county again, which I intuitively felt, but I'm like, oh my gosh, Pay for Success is here. Universal pre-K, all of this stuff that, some people are in love with and some people are talking against. But to me, the conversation is not directed at the source of the problem or the extent of the trauma that is actually being committed here. So that was, I guess, so the conference for me was a lot more information. I certainly have dwelt on it a little bit here and there. One of the pieces that I feel like I'm personally called to bring is to my faith community, because this was a Mormon transhumanist conference. And many people will automatically dismiss it and say, that is such a fringe piece of our faith that it doesn't even fit. They can ignore it. But I don't think that you can say that when you see the connection with the church publications, the leadership in the church's involvement, the growing interaction with these organizations that, from my upbringing, are completely contrary to our faith, which I think is one of the things that I have to say I was very pleased I walked away from, because I understand that it's difficult for the three of you coming from outside of the faith. I get it. On an intellectual level, you'll see like a piece here and a piece there, and then you go, oh, that means this. And that means that your faith is automatically promoting it, or it has a tendency towards that. And I think what you all witnessed after the breakdown, like when we met with the women and the few men who were there, it was like, wow, like this is not, and especially I think you were introduced to, some of our scriptures that clearly speak against it, because at the Mormon Transhumanist Conference, you're hearing bits of our scripture used to promote it. And this idea that I don't know, we didn't really talk about this after, because, there wasn't enough time. But I think you might have noticed there were a few times where some of the speakers would throw in scripture, and we're sitting in the front of the room because it's my fault, right? We're sitting in the front of the room. And so I'm realizing like everybody's looking at the back of my head, and I'm trying to not go, oh, like, to do this huge head roll and eye roll. I'm like, don't draw attention. So I'm like trying to be really still, but out of the corner of my eye, I can see like Lynn and Alison and Jason. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm trying to sort of keep it together, but I'm going, that is so against, and I wanted to call it out, but not draw attention to the big room and that kind of thing. But I know that I have a piece to play because it is my faith culture. And I think that this is definitely a part of my personal calling. But I'm still trying to figure that out. I'm still trying to figure out what my role and piece is to play, because I definitely feel like I'm standing on the shoulders of giants with you three. And where you have been in this technology piece for so long, where I'm very new to this. Just like I tell people, for the last 30 years, I've been watching the vaccine issue. For the last 8 years, I have been speaking out for informed medical consent. I'm very comfortable with that. And I knew there was a technology piece, but it wasn't something that was, interacting with my daily life. Now, as I'm starting to be introduced to more of your videos, Alison, and also yours, Lynn, I'm like, wow, you guys have been on this for a while, and I'm trying to play catch up. So I'm still trying to figure out what my piece is in this whole discussion. I know I have a role to play, but maybe you'll help me to figure it out, since I'm a verbal processor.
Yeah.
Thank you, Truth.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I know when Tamika Tilleman was talking, I did not remain composed. I think I was just like, my head was all over the place. Lynn, what was your takeaway from going out there? And it was great having you guys all come out.
Yeah, it was really eye-opening. I think in some ways I was not surprised, but I mean, I guess in understanding all faiths will be sort of enveloped in this global brain that Alison has helped me understand. But why I think the Mormon faith is ripe for this agenda is because, and you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, Drew, but those who are outliers, like the conference we went to, I think it's easy for them to justify why this technology is, well, God wants us to use this technology. That's what this is for. This is how we can exponentially touch the whole world. We can, bring equity, and we can reach everybody. And I know that the Mormon faith, it does a really good job of answering the call to witness and to share, through service and through the mission trips. They're known for reaching people in all parts of the globe. So if you think about this from a technology standpoint, I think they view that, these Mormon transhumanists view this as, okay, well, I can justify this through scripture and through the Mormon faith, and just kind of, use it, justify. I guess it seems like they're justifying it. But all faiths, I think, are guilty of having a certain contingent that is going to use the technology, going to justify it, going to make money along the way, as well as use it for power and control. So I also study Islamic blockchain, and I study how, and like Alison and I have been studying, I grew up Baptist, I've been studying what the Baptists are doing in the blockchain world. So it's not really specific to Mormons, but it does. I do believe they have, because the money and the power and the reach that they're perfectly positioned to do this on a global scale, and so that conference, because there's so many really seasoned technology gurus that were in that room who happen to be Mormon, who are deeply entrenched in this fourth industrial revolution. So like Jason was talking about Klaus Schwab, it is easy to, he's the Dr. Evil. He's kind of the poster child of this dark, oligarchy that's trying to control us. And you can see the history going back to the 70s. We never even heard of him, but now we realize, oh my gosh, he's been working on this a very long time. But he's just one of many. And Alison helped me understand that we tend to view things, power, as a pyramid, but what she's helped me understand is that it's more of a network. And so I think if this is, I think it's a spiritual battle. If this is some sort of spiritual, supernatural thing, I do believe there are those out there who you can appeal to, their vanity, their egos, or whatever, like those people at the Transhumanism conference, that they will answer the call of the darker forces it's counterfeit. I believe it's all counterfeit. And so those of us like you, Drew, who you said, you're kind of from an intuitive place. I'm the same. I've always been able to see things, and that I didn't necessarily understand them, but I knew that my instincts were on target, so I knew to research it. So if I saw a company or a technology or an agenda or a program that just didn't smell right, I would go dig into it, go down the rabbit hole, follow the money, and my intuition was almost always right. And so I've come across people like Alison and Jason and you, who we may come from all different backgrounds, and our faith is different, but our hearts and our gut, instincts are telling us that we're all seeing the same thing. And so I find people who have that, their motives are pure, and they know that this is very dangerous and it's evil and it's wrong. And they really do, I truly believe they want to capture the hearts and souls and minds of our kids. So people who stand in the gap, they get all kinds of bullets and darts that fly at them. But it's something that I have to do, and I don't have a choice. I guess it's an obligation I have to do to sort of follow it, research it, expose it. I don't understand it necessarily as fast as Alison does. I always liken her to like a toddler can understand something before they can actually say it themselves. And so I'm like this little toddler. Yeah, listening to Alison, and I get you, but for me to be able to regurgitate it and share it with others, it takes me a little longer. And by the time I catch up, she's already moved on to the next thing. And I'm like, wait, I just grasped social impact bonds. Now you're asking me to understand the global brain. This is too much. So anyway, that's where I guess I see.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I come at this from more like, I guess you would say atheist, but I'm like, I don't have a container, but I do feel connection, and I do feel that there's more to this, and I'm really I try to be driven by my conscience, and I do have an intuitive thing like that's wrong, that should not happen, and so I am driven by that, even though I don't come from any particular faith, and it's pulling in all the faiths, but it's also pulling in people that don't have an attachment to any religious belief through scientism. Because if you watch there's a lot of shows on atheist shows, but they have a faith in the science, you know, and so they have their own thing that they're being pulled into, you know, following the authority, you know, trust the authorities on this and the experts. But yeah, it's kind of funny that all of us kind of come together because, you know, we do come from different, you know, ways of looking at the world, but we see this commonality of like, no, this is not right. This should not be happening. And so, Alison, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Well, so I just like to clarify how we ended up going, because it's not like I necessarily closely monitor their website, right? You know, anxiously waiting the next conference. I think the Mormon Transhumanist Conference, and again, I know that most members of the church identify as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So my understanding is that their choice of words of the Mormon Transhumanist Conference is reflecting somewhat of their outsider status. And I may be, I don't know, am I right on that, Drew? I don't know if that makes sense if you're here.
I see why you say that, and it does make sense. Although we've been identified as Mormon for quite a while. It's
okay.
Well,
I thought
there was
a semantic break that they felt that maybe that was not such an affirmative word, and
they did, and you bring that up because that was brought up in the after talk, right, with all the people, which is true. But I just have to tell you that there was a shift with President Nielsen, who made that shift specifically. You know, like we started removing. It's been something that we've always acknowledged, that we're really not Mormons, right? You know, we believe in the Book of Mormon, but we're followers of Jesus Christ. That's what the church title is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but it's a mouthful. And so it's only normal for people to sort of go, well, yeah, you're the Mormons, and for us to go, But there was a purposeful shift for us as a global church, worldwide church. I don't even want to say the word global. You'll see I'm like choking on it. Because we used to refer to us more as a worldwide church. And now that you pointed out like global, I see the global everywhere. But there was not that long ago a purposeful shift for us as a worldwide church to no longer refer to ourselves as that. So yes, it's true. And yes, we've always tried to steer people that way. But that's more of a sort of recent, hard, fast sort of like line in the sand that's been drawn.
Interesting. Okay, well, so just as far as how we ended up coming, at some point, Lynn and I, we have our days where sometimes more down in the dumps than others, and we're like, well, we should meet up somewhere. Maybe we should, meet up. And I said, I don't even know where we would go. Like, I don't, it's sort of, and then literally 2 days later, a woman that we know in common that goes way back from our education work sent me a text with the link to that conference and just said, I think if anybody could go and make sense of what's happening at this conference, it'd be you, Alison. And, as a member of the church and someone who's in the greater Salt Lake area, and I opened it up and I said, oh, well, thank you. Yes, that is it. That's, hey, Lynn, you want to meet up with us in Salt Lake City and attend? So it wasn't that we were deciding to go as like a gotcha on members of the faith. It was because really the nature of that conference, it was very specific in it being thematic about blockchain and decentralization, which is something that really also affects Lynn specifically, because so much of what's happening in Dallas is related to the blockchain education transcripts, and Texas, the work we did last fall around the blockchain conference in Texas, which has connections to the Dallas Baptist College, right? So there it's Baptist, right? So it's in other places, but that's really what led us to go. And so I was pretty familiar, again, with the fact that Tamika Tilleman was a very prominent person in the social impact space and the digital identity space. And there were several other people, which is how I thought, no, this actually makes sense to go. And if at this point, very prominent national figures in the social impact space are aligning their reputation and their name to a conference that identifies as being sponsored by the Transhumanists, then that means that we've reached a new level of acceptance and normalization of this. So we went actually upon sort of request of somebody in the church who suggested that this would be good to go. And I think hopefully, and we did some debriefs of folks afterwards because people are interested. They maybe don't want to sit in a room and have to spend all day doing this, but they want to know what happened. And so, so as far as that's the background for me. And really, I think as far as takeaways, I was familiar with most of the themes. The fact that Scott Stornetta presented and that he spoke about being, he and his partner creating the early decentralized ledger system and speaking about it within the context of his faith, that to me is a very different story than the anonymous Satoshi Nakamoto story. That's a different narrative. Scott Stornetta at the Friendlies in Northern New Jersey and Bell Labs and the world as witness to blockchain transactions. That's a different a kind of story. And, you know,
right, their guard was down, and they told.
Say again?
Oh, their guard was down, and so they shared more things that we wouldn't normally hear.
Well, I thought it was.
Although I think they knew we were coming because there was an early on intervention sort of engagement to sort of settle terms early in the day and sort of directed at us. Although everything we said was very measured. It wasn't inflammatory. And I have to say, when I think there might be a certain sense from people who didn't attend of what kinds of people were in the room, like maybe they, you know, are somewhat aberrant, or I don't even know what they would have. No, these were just regular people. These were, you know, these were regular people in, you know, cardigan sweaters and techie people and a few people in a beret. Like, these were just regular people who like technology. Their brain works well with technology. They think they're helping people. And literally they're living in a story where it's that here's your tool. We have these tools, maybe even sacred technologies, and they're going to help us help the world and solve the world's problems. And their story doesn't include all of the things we know. So our story is a very different story. And so the interfacing of those stories is challenging to them, that there might be another story. And I think at the end, some of the pushback that we got from sponsors of the conference were that we weren't being fair, that we were asserting that there were perhaps unintended negative consequences, and that really they didn't want anyone to know that there was another possible storyline out there. And that's the impression that I got. So again, just within the context of the criticism that was leveled at us immediately thereafter, not by the conference people, but by independent people who made presumptions about what this event was, I'm here to tell you that it wasn't how it was represented by people who weren't there, that it was a lot of people who are trying to figure this out, some who know more about the story than others. For the most part, the people who were in the room were receptive to our materials and knowing that there was another side. And it was about blockchain. Really, it was a blockchain conference sponsored by Transhumanists. And we went because it was a blockchain conference. And Salt Lake City is very important as a tech center.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you started this whole part talking about how they're just normal people, because I'm not sure what I was expecting. So I was the first one to arrive and to kind of get up to the room. And I don't know what I'm walking into, and I probably have imagined certain things. And as I'm walking up and I see the table and them setting out the materials and all of this kind of stuff, and I've many times been in that position where you're trying to set up for an event and you're behind the table and all this kind of stuff. And I just was like, oh, they're like people. And I caught myself thinking, like, what was I expecting? That you know, that they would be some sort of other species of animal? You know, I don't know.
Or they look like Klaus Schwab.
Odd that I caught myself feeling like, what was I expecting to find? And, you know, they were people, genuine. Some, to me, I think their perspective I found odd, I will admit, you know, but Looking back at some of the questions that all of us posed when I was listening to both Alison and Lynn, and there were a few questions that followed that there were concerned people in the room also, maybe not as forth. I don't know. We were
Outspoken.
we were passionate, I guess. I wanted to be careful about that, because we were in no way like aggressive or hostile at all. But we were pretty passionate about what we were asking when we got up to the mic. And when I re-listened to some of those videos, I saw that some of the people behind us had some concerns too. They liked the idea, like you're saying, their brains work well with technology, and it wouldn't be a cool thing. But I sensed some others in the room were concerned as well.
Yeah, well, even I operate a lot in the blockchain space through some of the work that I do, and whenever I bring up my concerns with people, I'm always surprised. I'm always expecting more pushback than I get. So even within that space, there are a lot of people who see that there's a problem, but they also don't want to like dwell too much on it.
I don't want to say it.
Like, I mean, even Lincoln Cannon the organizer came up to us, and he says, we're concerned about these things too. And we're like, okay, well,
not enough.
How come you don't have even one speaker that's, raising these questions? It was a selling thing. They're selling you on this the entire time.
Yeah.
So if there are concerns, you're keeping them to yourself, And it was the MC of the thing was kind of interesting, because he kept going, one question only. And I'm like, we're not asking multiple. I mean, one question for the entire conference. What I didn't quite understand that, but I mean, the whole thing's on video. Like I thought we were pretty respectful, actually.
We were. It was just to silence Alison, honestly, and Lynn to some degree, because how could you not ask a follow-up question to the questions that they were asking? But I mean, and there were other people, and yes, but those comments were directed, I believe, specifically at Alison and Lynn to silence their part of the narrative, because we just heard one side, and who is there speaking out for the other side besides us? Maybe a few people. And Ilana is coming to Tucson this week, and just so you know. And our good friend, do you know who Ilana Freeland is, Lynn?
Yeah.
So she spoke at my last Health and Human Rights Summit, where Alison spoke as well. And so she is doing a bit of a book tour that's, I don't know where it's starting, but she's coming from California to here, or maybe from California to New Mexico and then to here, something. But anyway, by the end of the week, by Thursday, Ilana's going to be here. She'll be speaking in Tucson Sunday.
Nice.
Wow.
So on her new book and stuff. So,
Can I say a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Just so I want to clarify just a couple things too about my research, like sort of before and since the trip. And also the idea of the transhumanist as a concept, because that was brought up a lot in criticism that was leveled by certain parties. And so I would say, I just want to make sure that people understand, I've started to kind of call it human plus, because I feel like it's the human augmentation, and that some of the ideas people have about what transhumanism represents, they sort of imagine something like a surgical procedure with like a neural link in your head, or a robot eye, or something that is a more major intervention. And I think that obscures somewhat the nanotechnology that's in place that Ilana talks, it is the focus of her book. But then the other piece of the Human Plus program is your digital twin. And that's something that I think in the near term is really more the focus of what they're developing on blockchain and through digital identity, is that the transhumanist or the human plus agenda is about the digital twinning. And that is taking place through the healthcare system and through the education system and through the public welfare systems. And so the twin part is also transhuman and human plus. And so as a blockchain conference, it wasn't like people were up there talking about selling you on cyborg technology. Really, it was about the decentralization and the digital identity. So that said, a lot of my work before and after has been looking into the work of Julia Stolman and Oliver Reiser and Fritz Kunst, and this concept that dates back at least to the World War II era of a global brain and this world sensorium. And I think it may go back even earlier. And it's somewhat wrapped up in the concept of scientific progress, but also eugenics. You know, that we're flawed, or we could be better. And if we had the right implants or the right, you know, if we were just dosed with a little bit of radiation, could be like really blossom, you know, is this new human plus thing. And so a lot of that work actually interfaced with the Manhattan Project and with the Cold War and with the mining operations that were related to uranium, which is where Jason and I went. We went to southeastern Utah after the time that we were in Salt Lake City and did field research there. And even today, it's hit me that the frequency weapons and the radiation relating to our brainwaves and our bodily functions, that this has been a really central feature for 80 years. You know, going literally for a long time. And it makes me want to think about C.S. Lewis and the time that he was living, because he was actually living through this in England the same time frame. And it makes me wonder how much he knew, because a lot of this was connected to the Fabian socialists and spiritualists and H.G. Wells and these conversations with fellow authors about science fiction. And so, you know, his Abolition of Man might have been really a very direct response to what he was hearing bubbling up about the Global Brain Project in the 30s and 40s. That connection to Utah, really interesting. And Vannevar Bush, who was part of this project, he was the direct report to FDR. He was working on this radiation, microwave radiation programs, as well as the Manhattan Project. And he was the founder of Raytheon. And he was working with this person, Alfred Loomis, on a private research lab that was doing brainwave and heartwave technologies in the 30s, using this radiation for military purposes. And you know, it's moving right forward. Like Raytheon never went away, right? Those weapons never went away. It's all dual use, and it's all being framed as the frontier of science. We're going to go to war with disease. That's what Vannevar Bush, who created the National Science Foundation, that was his letter to Truman, was we are going to go to war against disease and health and radiation and microwaves and uranium for everyone. And so now, guess what? We'll put a radiating device Chromebook in the hand of every school child, and we will radiate them into the global brain. And, you know, it's crazy to say that, but I think I think that's where it's going. And Lynn, I mean, when we first started on this road about the school privatization, who would think? Like, who would think that these, you know, blockchain credentialing systems and devices that they're putting into schools weren't just about closing schools and data mining kids, but were potentially somewhere back there, back in the 1940s, there were people who were thinking about irradiating people into some mutant, you know, using their sacred technology to mutate us into this new jumpstart into this new humanity, cyborg moonshot project. So, anyway, I'm grateful for having spent all of this time in Utah to see it, to actually see it, to understand why did the educational technologists buy the top of a mountain north of Salt Lake? Why did they buy Powder Mountain? You know, and then you look at the history and it starts to make more sense, like intuitively and then factually. So anyway, I'm just grateful for all you guys who like hang on with me for this crazy ride, because I do feel that that Utah, among other places, but has this very central role in what's unfolding in the global brain as the beehive state. And I keep saying, right, the beehives. Yeah. And, you know, that was right for the building that where the, you know, it was in the Brigham Academy, which is the Provo Library, which is where they had the conference, was the beehive was right there. And so there's the beautiful natural beehive, right? And then there's the hive mind. And then those are two very different things. And one is sacred and one is profane. So, and navigating and threading the needle on that is something that is going to be really challenging, but I think we're up for that challenge.
Yeah, I just wanted to go to the national parks, and Allison's like, "Hey, there's uranium mining down here." And there we are. Lynn, so you do a show, and so you're trying to introduce in your own way a lot of these ideas and realities to a different audience in Dallas. What's been your experience, or the reaction when you talk to people about some of this?
Well, I did post some pictures of our time in Utah, and I said, the only way you can get me to wear a mask is on an airplane on the way to a Mormon transhumanism conference. And I had to say, okay, I'm neither transhumanist nor am I Mormon, but those who have been following, I put a lot of stuff out on social media. I do talk about transhumanism on my podcast, but not overtly. I mostly try and show people, what does this look like on the ground level? And when I was on when I was a guest on your If We Were Honest back in 2020, I tried to do the same, because we knew about the World Economic Forum. We knew about smart cities and transhumanism, but I wanted people to understand that's not some nebulous thing out there. This is directly, it's happening, and it comes in through our commissioners' courts and our city councils and our school districts, because they all have to adopt these pieces of the smart city and the surveillance state and the Internet of Things, which will lead to the Internet of Bodies and bio-nano things. So it doesn't just come on the scene as, hey, you want to be a transhumanist, or hey, want to live forever. It all has to start at the local level in these incremental stages. So when I posted the pictures from the event, the books, like that book that we saw Drew in the very beginning at the registration table.
Making Gods, I think, or something like that. It was
Yes.
Making Gods.
So, I mean, right out of the gate, it was like, that's shocking that they just come out and say that. Yeah. So it is, to me, it is playing God. And it is, and by that they want to extend life, and I don't think that they will succeed at that. But there are all kinds of awful things that will happen along the way while they're trying to do it, and we will be enslaved in their game. But people, as far as like the things that I put out there, I get censored and shadow banned a lot on social media. But this one actually had, I just pulled it up, it had 185 likes and 98 comments and 58 shares. That's a lot. Normally things get, I get, a handful of comments because I am being censored. So that was good to have the engagement. And so then I went on another show of a talk show that has a national audience, and she was so intrigued by this, and we couldn't stop giggling because it's not funny, but it is so bizarre that I was sitting there talking to her. Her mind is just kind of, she was kind of blown, and I would see her response and I couldn't help but laugh. I'm like, how did I get here that I'm talking about this? But it is, I have to talk about it, and it is real. It's an imminent threat to humanity and our children. And so that's just, but, and we had, here, the thing at the conference, I think what resonated with those in the audience is like, when I asked, I said, okay, I feel like this is the elephant in the room. Are you familiar with Klaus Schwab and you will own nothing and you will be happy? And Tamika Tillman's like, no, I'm not familiar with that. And the audience is all, I look over, I'm thinking, am I crazy? And they're all going, no, we know what you're talking about. We've all heard that phrase, that you will own nothing and you'll be happy. So that was never discussed by any of the speakers. These are supposed to be the foremost experts, on this subject. And really, you've never heard that? Okay, come on. Don't be coy.
When that you will own nothing doesn't apply to everyone. I mean, it clearly some people are going to own some things in this new system. It just applies to the majority of people. They want, it's a service, they're moving us into this service-based economy. But Drew, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say that as I re-listened to Lynn asking that question in the room, and I, of course, this is open to interpretation, but I think there were some people who were like, yeah, we've heard that. And then some people who sort of responded like, yeah, we've heard that. Like almost like they were, I don't
So
think it was either one or the other. I think there were some responses for both positive and negative in that. And again, that's my interpretation of sort of the response, the muffled responses after you asked that question. That was just my thing. And before I forget, if you don't mind, one of the things that Alison had said, and I think this is a good thing to put into or to compare to other things, is this comparison of a natural beehive and then the beehive state. We can talk about where I think that comes from, but maybe at another time, because there's a scripture to which it's being referred. But we're talking about natural bees, okay? And you just said, there's a difference between a natural hive, nature, and hive mind. It's not the same thing. And so I do recognize and I accept, and I'm trying my best to help those understand with, who all, each and every one of you are respectful of me as I'm, the only one of the four of us who's come from, this is my faith culture. And, and I appreciate that, as I'm trying to express my faith culture, and you're willing to be respectful as I try to do that, right? And so in the way that we talk about this difference between like a natural hive and a hive mind, I think that's also a good way to explain this difference between what is often misunderstood as our relationship with our creator. And I feel like, well, we look at that in a more natural way, like the family relationships that we have here on this earth. We believe that they will be perpetuated into eternity. Yes, we do. I don't think we're the only faith that says, like, yes, my mother is in heaven, or, my father, or I hope to see them again someday. So that is not just us. We do believe that there is a perpetuation of life hereafter. I think what is in question, though, is that we see that relationship, whether it's with our, our earthly bound family or that of our creator, is in this natural sense, versus what everyone that I know who is against this Mormon transhumanist, it's very clear to us that it's this relationship. It's not a relationship like of the natural world. It's this create their own self-creation into gods, which I hear and I understand the criticism for decades, as long as I've been, on the earth before, that outside the faith looking into us, that's kind of like, that's what they think we're doing. And thank you for allowing me to try to explain this to you, is that, see, we see it as more of the natural relationship of family and father or mother perpetuated into the next life, versus what the Mormon transhumanists are about is an abomination. I don't know how else to say it. It's the difference between sacred and profane, as you often say.
Can I speak to that? Because I think you've really articulated that well. And so Alison was saying the sacred versus the profane. And I have had hexagons and bees and the hive mind on my radar for a number of years, because I believe it's just counterfeit, whatever God made for good, the enemy create a counterfeit version. And so I know that to be true about, because bees and honeycombs and the natural order of bees is organic, and God is designed by the creator. This to me is the perfect counterfeit model. And so when I wrote this article back in 2018, I think it was, no, 2019, about hexagons and the hive mind, because I kept seeing the hexagon shape and that symbol, and it was everywhere with technology and digital badging. I also saw it in it was Uber and how they wanted to hexagonify the globe. And so they have this model of the world broken down into hexagonal tiles. And so it was like this picture, this grid that covered the whole planet. And then if you study bees, why the hexagon shape is so perfect is that it can maximize. Darwin said the honeycomb is absolutely perfect in economizing labor and wax. So when you think about us as being laborers and they're wanting to squeeze and extract every bit of whatever they can out of us, whether that's our activity or our bodies or our brains, any kind of output. That fits with where we see with this transhumanism model. I think with geofencing, smart cities, the surveillance state, you could break down the world. The world is very small when you think about cells and then smaller cells, and then the way that technology is. We're putting cell towers everywhere, and we're doing more frequent cell towers, and they're getting closer and closer and more advanced. You can picture this, as Alison says, this panopticon that we will be living under, and we will be enslaved and chained to our wherever we live geographically. I know Dallas was going to be a headquarters for Uber, and they had all these models that were designed. And I've always said Uber's not a transportation company. They don't make any money. I think it's actually just a front for what is going to lead to geofencing. But all these models had hexagons in them, and the landing pad had a hexagon, and the buildings on the inside, the tiles on the ceiling were hexagonal. It was just kind of weird. But I see that everywhere. And then, Bezos was talking about the swarm, and you could have this sort of, we could all be in this global brain. I mean, he didn't call it that, but that's what it is. And we're all kind of moving the same direction, and we can make decisions as a hive, this swarm of energy and groupthink. And that was a positive thing. So this is something, this is real. It is, it's difficult to define. And if you see it everywhere. And if you don't see it, then you think, oh, that sounds crazy. And you can't even relate to what we're saying. But we just keep meeting people who do see this, and they understand this is very serious. It's not, we're not imagining it. And so we have to speak, and talk about it and alert people to it.
So one of the things
go ahead.
I'm sorry. So one of the things that I find that, like we say, Mormons are primed for, I want to put this within the context of natural versus counterfeit. I love that because, it's not like one or the other. It's both. It's the natural hive and then the hive mind. They're not the same. And so sometimes we see these pieces and we think, oh, well, that means it's bad. And no, that means that which are we looking at? The true or the counterfeit? That's the question, is are we looking at the true or the counterfeit? And one of the things that I have appreciated so much about my faith culture that we can really rely on, honestly, is this culture built around, and I say it all the time, duty is ours, results are God's. And we are a very dutiful people. And I see that there's a lot of positive in that. That once you are sort of you understand what your duty is, and I will admit to you, that's one of the things that drives me today, is that I'm not necessarily, while I understand what the outcomes could be, I'm not necessarily tied to the outcome. I'm tied to doing the right thing, right? So duty is ours. I think that's an incredible thing that we really have as a culture in our church and all over the world. It's almost like you can flip a switch and people en masse, or how they're going to act. What's the counterfeit? It's the hive mind. And I think my personal criticism for my own culture, which I am allowed to do, right, is that we've traded that relationship that we've had with God for following, a counterfeit leader. And that means that a lot of people are not going to do the right thing. And we've been warned about this, not just simply in my faith culture, but the scripture clearly states that the way is narrow. And even from our scriptures of the tree of life, Lehi's vision of the tree of life is that it's a very narrow way, and there's a lot of darkness, and most people are lost in the darkness. It makes us sad, but I think the only reason why I bring that up is I think that in all of our cultures, there is some sort of remnant of that we can all share. That I'm glad that we're not alone. We have each other, but it's comforting in a sense for me to realize like most people aren't going to get me, and that my responsibility is just to speak. And like Alison says, to remove plausible deniability.
It's interesting.
That's all we can do.
I come at this from like a non-religious place, but I agree with what you're saying from a philosophical standpoint. And I do think that there's something just wrong about our relationship to the natural world and this fiction that's being built on top of it, that's destroying it. It's actually destroying it. And so it's kind of funny because like I come at this from a different place, but I end up I kind of still end up in the same place. From a philosophical standpoint, maybe I have a little bit different framing of it, but I felt this a long time. Like there's a conflict between the natural world and like the artificial world that involves money and law and technology and these replications. So anyways, it's just kind of interesting. The dynamics here.
Yeah, and I appreciate that every time you bring it up, Jason, and I hope like you're not.
I hear you. Yeah.
Are you? Yeah.
And I respect you, and I respect you where you're coming from. That's where I have because it used to be like, I used to be like more of an adamant atheist. I'm like, yeah, religion's bad and blah, blah. But I realized like I looked around. I'm like, you know what? I have a lot of friends that are religious that actually share my same values. So if someone tells me that they're Christian, for example, that doesn't tell me anything about who they are. Like I know people that are pro-war and xenophobic and hateful. And then I know people. I helped a friend with a documentary about some nuns who did protest at a missile silo and actually went to prison for it. One of them was actually cellmates with Martha Stewart, which is a funny story. But but I realized like who are our allies? I look around and nationality, religion, gender, these things don't determine who I consider my allies or not. So, I feel connected to all three of you at a heart level, and so it's not like that, we may have different containers and different, belief systems or whatever, but I think what matters most is that, I think we do share an ethic.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess what I'm asking for your input towards how I view our faith culture is that do you agree? Do you see it or not see it that within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, there seems to be a very strong cultural ethic that will move masses of people with like on a dime. Because of their culture, because of my culture. And in some ways I see that as a really powerful and wonderful thing. But with this counterfeit in place, I see super troubling.
Well, I'm weary of.
Is it my own bias towards my own faith that I think that we're more inclined to that? Not that I see us more like this group for both positive and negative, a groupthink. Mm-hmm. And I guess I'm asking for a clarification or validation. If on the outside you view us that way, I'm wondering. I think we're getting a lot of attention for the negative, but like I see both positive and negative.
Yeah.
Can
Well,
I-
from
can
a
I say
principled, well, let me just clarify. From a principled standpoint, everything you said, I agree with, though, in terms of your commitment to duty, and to do the right things and disconnect yourself from the outcome. I'm in total agreement with that. I am just weary of any. I mean, it could be a government, it could be a corporation, it could be a religious institution. I'm pretty weary of institutions in general. But anyway, Alison, sorry.
So, no, I just wanted to say, so my initial contact with Salt Lake City was, well, through this friend who connected me with someone who was led a group of maternal feminists, and they were actually connected with United Nations, but skeptical about what was going on there and had been looking into it. And so I was supposed to go to New York to the United Nations to speak to this group that was connected with the church, with global outreach, before all of the lockdowns happened. Like literally, this was all falling apart at the end of February, right before the pandemic was announced. And so I felt like I was fated to have some connection with Salt Lake City through that. And I went because it was a global reach, and I was talking about women and children, and they were talking about women and children. And they were also talking, like they understood what I was trying to say about the impact markets. And so that duty and global reach, I felt like, yes, you go to the people because I trust that people have good hearts, but they don't know. They don't know the other side. They don't know that there is a counterfeit or how to navigate it. And so, and I can't tell people what to think, but I can present them with information that hopefully would give them a more informed choice in the matter. Because if you don't have the information, you don't have a choice at all. And so I think at that global level, yes, if there is tremendous power on both sides because of the collective action, historically, for the LDS Church. But that said, in terms of numbers, I've gotten to the point, mostly because of just the experience of the last year and a half, of moving from we prevail with numbers, like we need to mass huge amounts of numbers of people and we need to make compromises on our values because our goal is numbers. We can't change this if we don't have the numbers. And certain people live in that story of, if we don't have all of these people, we can't affect the change that we want, and therefore we need to make compromises to get there. And and that I'm not going to judge people who are, but I'm like, the story I live in is actually at a frequency level and a field level that maybe this is this ultimate quest that not everyone is even going to see the challenge. Not everyone is even going to know there's a counterfeit, but those of us who do, if God puts that in front of us, whoever your God is around the world puts that in front of you to know, what do you do next? What do you do next? And to me, that feels like in those small numbers of people, not because we're special, but for whatever reason, we've come into the world to face this challenge, that maybe 1 in 10,000 people will be the person to see it. And then what do you do? And then it's that principled, moving forward from a heart place of, even though it's challenging, to move forward with the confidence that at the end of the day, God, nature, the right will prevail, as long as we proceed from that heart space of integrity. And we don't need 2,000 people behind us to do that. In fact, that may not be how it's supposed to play out. Maybe those people remain oblivious and they never even know what the danger is. And those of us who can see have to move forward. And so, I don't know if that speaks to particularly the church, but its historical context in technology and faith and collectivism and manifest destiny and uranium, and for all of those other reasons, it feels like being in that room to take away plausible deniability and let people know that there was a choice of what to do next was important. And that's why all of us being there in that space was important that day, because not that we were going to turn and all of a sudden all of those political people running for office in that room are going to change their mind and line people up behind our leadership, because none of us are, trying to be the voice to tell everybody what to do. We're just following our own path. And by example, where it resonates, it resonates. Anyway.
Well, I had a friend the other day was like, and is everybody, we're just talking about the everything that's going on with the pandemic or whatever. He's like, everybody can't be in on it. Everybody can't be in on it. It's like, everything's not a conspiracy. And I'm like, well, it's a system, and we all submit to the system. So I talk a lot about agency. Like, if people actually had agency. So Drew, I know you come from your place of heart. So you don't just listen to what the leadership tells you. You check it. You check with yourself. I feel like that's what you do. You're constantly checking with your own heart and saying, does this ring true? And whatever that is, if that's call that God, call that, for me, it would just be your conscience, and it's more vague, but like that thing, whatever that is, when you're like, oh no, this is wrong. Like the intuitive part of it is really what, if more people did that and lived life where they evaluated things and thought about things and actually were allowed to have some sort of agency. Because if you work for a corporation, or if you're within a group, whether it's a religious group or a political group or whatever, they're the individual ends up kind of being lost to the super organism. You know what I mean? And I trust the individual more than I trust the super organism. Anyway. But I'm also saying we're also connected too. Like, I'm not saying we're just individuals disconnected either. I believe in the individual and us together. Lynn, thoughts?
Well, it's I think it's difficult because it's the faith piece is very sensitive. I mean, I know that from an evangelical perspective, those of us who, like, I know as Christians, we are called to share, but that doesn't mean we impose our faith on people. We expose people to it by talking about it. And I have friends who are Catholic, and they're always wanting me to go do this or that. And I always say, I'm never going to ask you to not be Catholic. But I'm never going to be Catholic. And so I guess the same goes with the LDS or Mormon faith. I'm never going to be Mormon, but I'm never going to ask you to not be Mormon. This is what I believe, and I understand what you believe, and that's your prerogative. But I think we can agree, even coming from different faiths, because I bring up my friends who are Catholic because many of them I've been drawn to several women who are Catholic who see all of this, and so I can't make sense of it. Why do so many people in the church, in the Christian church, not see this coming, and they are falling prey to all of the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the language that is infiltrating the church, and they're starting to do more of this social impact stuff, social innovation, and so I see it, and I'm deeply concerned, and it has, I don't think it follows Jesus in any way, but the counterfeit would tell them, I mean, if they are, for whatever reason, they're falling prey to the counterfeit. The counterfeit would say, oh yeah, Jesus, he would totally be for equity in this, technology that would, or whatever it is that's being sold to us as being good for us, and it'll level the playing field and everybody will own nothing and be happy. That, I don't think that has anything to do with what Jesus was doing here. Also, I will say that with there's faith and then there's works, and so that always has to be in constant balance, because I'm not religious. I don't believe God wants our religion. That's us working our way to God. I believe that as an outpouring of my faith, I want to serve and help others, but that can get out of balance if I don't keep myself in check. I see that, and Drew, I do understand that you're trying to get. I do understand you. So you were asking Jason, like, does that you were curious, does that make sense? I understand it because I also see the faiths being attacked. Doesn't matter what. There's always criticism of different faiths. Oh, well, y'all believe this, and you believe that. I know I grew up with people who were Church of Christ. Oh, well, everybody's going to hell if they're not Church of Christ. I mean, that's what they were taught when they were younger. A lot of faiths have evolved. And they don't necessarily subscribe to a lot of the rigidity of the past. I know the Baptist church that I grew up in, they're not they don't say, oh, you can't drink or dance anymore. That's what they used to say. So they're evolving, but they're not evolving in a way that is, I think there's a dangerous evolution because they're now more accepting of this movement, this agenda that will, I think, capitalize on people who think they're doing good and serving and being faithful, and really it's a trap. It's a counterfeit.
Well, I think the definition of power comes into play. Like, what is power? Like the idea that you need power, that we need to be powerful in order to do good works, versus an individual personal power doing good works in their own life. But I think that has a lot to do with it, and that's kind of where I'm a little bit concerned, where there's any concentration of power. I'm more cautious. And I see churches as being very powerful institutions. Sorry, Alison, go.
Could we get a time check before Alison's comment? I don't know what time it is.
Oh, well, I have 3:13. I'm in Denver. We're all going to have different times here.
Oh, shoot.
We're an hour and 13 minutes.
Okay. I'm supposed to be leaving.
Oh, you've got to take off?
Yeah. I'm sorry. You guys can continue without me, but
well, thank you.
I mean, we barely scratched the.
We just started.
I know.
We can do it again.
Do you want to do
I
a
would be
round
happy
robin
to do it again.
comment?
Let's
You want to do a round robin final thoughts?
Yeah, that would be good. Can we just do something to tie this up? Drew, since you have to, leave, do you want to just say some final words from our conversation here?
I will say that I think it is appropriate that so many of us from different perspectives, being that we're all God's children, are coming to this very similar and same conclusion. This happened with me about 2 weeks after the weaponized narrative. Those of you who know me know that I called it out like immediately. I posted on social media that this was a weaponized narrative. People around the country, my family, because I've been speaking out against it for, at that point, 6 years. They're wanting to know what my opinion is. And I said immediately, yes, and I did go out on a limb, but I'm like, this is a weaponized narrative. I'm not saying that people weren't sick. I'm not saying that no one was injured or hurt. But I was saying that it was a weaponized narrative. And so we were all sort of dealing with the shock of that. And about 2 weeks in, at my home, there were a group of women. We gathered together, and we were still technically under lockdown, where we weren't supposed to be in any, traveling but we all kind of were like, we're doing it anyway. And so they all came and gathered at my house. And I remember us sitting there, and each and every one of us was a different faith. And yet we felt like we were at home in our faith. And I think that it's appropriate, creator inspired, that has been the result for many of us. Like the fact that we're all here together right now. I know it's technology, but still, I love you all so much. I am so blessed. I'm so blessed to have each and every one of you in my life. And I just think that it's appropriate from a position of faith that we found each other, and that we're honestly spreading the message, in my opinion, that we're all God's children,
I love that.
Well, I love you too, Drew. And even though I come from a different perspective, I respect you and, your journey.
Thanks. Well, do you want me to leave now? I was going to listen to what
I know. Alison, why don't you go?
Okay, so I would just say I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I feel like what's been revealed to me over all this course is the beauty of people standing in their faith, but in a mutual respect of others. Because they're looking for a new world order that erases people's cultural distinctions, their relationship to the land, their relationship to their foods, their relationship to their languages, their relationships to their faith. This global brain disrespects all of that and frames it as a harmonious unity that erases all of it. But I think it's the heart space and our sacred connection to God that is what's going to prevail over all of this. So within my crazy global brain book that I'm reading, I'm just going to read this one quick paragraph that says, so what we're up against, and it's so challenging narratively, is they've set up an interfaith. All of these interfaith movements that are funded by outside funders are meant to push the homogenization. And so I in no way want to pit faiths against one another, and to say, but at the same time, the interfaith people are going to be the Trojan horse of the cultural erasure of all faiths, which is really hard to say, and because they don't come right out and say it, but that's where it's going to go. They're a vehicle of this. And where science fits in, Drew, because that's your journey, because you've been going up against scientism for so long. This is Conrad Hilton Rice writing to Oliver Reiser in the World Sensorium book. Undoubtedly, Link is right in The Return to Religion, but for most of us, there can be no return to the old doctrines. There must be a new religion growing up out of scientific revelation. I have been thinking of a universal temple, a hookup of edifices with incense, colors, and music to soothe the senses, and a radio voice that speaks to all as one, so that a kind of mass hypnosis is achieved, and the individuals feel themselves joined in a unitary consciousness. Quite a fanciful idea, isn't it? With all good wishes, cordially yours, Hilton Rice. And so when I read that, I feel like, and this was probably written in the late 1930s, and at the same time, C.S. Lewis, right? Similar era. And that this to me says the metaverse. We're going to lull you to sleep with our hypnotic radio voice, and you'll be happy, right? You'll own nothing and be happy because you'll be in our digital incense temple of unity. But it disrespects the natural relationship of individuals to God as they understand it, and to everything of the natural world. So anyway, that's how I'll close. So, but just reaffirming what you said, Drew.
Lynn?
Yeah, I'm always envious of how Alison can say, I'm not even an in there. I mean, she just says it so easily and so succinctly. And yes, that's ditto. But I think I've always observed this trend, this sort of movement, this undercurrent of one world, one currency, one religion. I've been seeing that for probably 2 decades since I started really paying attention to what was happening around me. So I could see that happening, and I see it's moving so much faster because of the pandemic, or the crisis that was a global crisis that was created, and it was the perfect tool to lull us and to move us collectively in that direction. And so those of us, all 4 of us, we instantly saw it. We recognized it for what it was the minute it happened. And Alison was at my house that January before, the crazy hit. And she had a sense of urgency. I could see it, but we didn't see that coming. But the minute it hit, we realized, oh, wow, this is it. This is how they're going to do it. And it really did move us forward at a pace that we didn't see coming. So I guess I don't have really anything profound to say to close, other than I think it is important for us to connect in ways that are, heart to heart, people to people, one to one, as much as I can. It isn't a numbers game, like Alison said. I've never viewed, even like, I know, Drew, you're in a campaign. I'm in the middle of a campaign. It's really not about politics or winning that seat. It's about connecting with people, and whoever can hear, then I want to connect with them, and whoever sees this, I want to be able to share information with each other, people that I trust, and I'm finding that through this through these people that emerge, who are just wonderful, beautiful people who care about what's going to happen to our families and our kids and our grandkids if we don't stand in the gap. And so that's what I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, and my thing, Drew, you mentioned, the weaponized narrative, and Alison, the global brain. And one thing I think about is this: they're selling this to everybody based on lies. It's not even the story is just, it's not even true. They say we're going to protect the environment. We're going to create equality and equity, and it's going to be democratic. The global brain, you're going to have a vote. Well, I've been studying global politics for pretty much my whole life, and going back to World War I. Oh, I'm going to mute you, Drew, because your feedback. But going back to World War I, they sold this as democracy. We're bringing democracy to the world. That's what we're doing, and most of us know that, we don't really, the democracy itself is a lie. Even the republic is a lie. Your representative, does anybody really feel like these politicians represent them? That's a lie. And so the idea that this is going to be some democratic thing is a lie. Yet, a lot of people go along with it because they believe the story. And so we have a lot of, we have truth on our side and reality. And so we just got to keep at it. And I'm really grateful to have met the three of you, and look forward to doing more stuff together. On that, we'll just call it good.